I am Blaine Carter, Oracle's developer advocate for open source. There's my contact information if you need to get a hold of me for any questions, comments, or suggestions. In this series, we're going to take a look at using the CX Oracle open source Python utility to perform some basic CRUD operations against an Oracle database. CRUD, of course, being create, read, update, and delete. For those who prefer a written tutorial, this series and all of the examples can be found on my blog at learncodeshare.net. Before you get going, there are some prerequisite steps that can be found in the introduction and setup video. In this section, we'll take a look at creating new data in the database. We'll perform single and multiple inserts, we'll talk about transactions, and we'll go over how to return data after the insert. I'll be using a helper function called getAllRows. Basically, it's just a simple select statement that we'll use to verify that the data changes worked. The select functionality is covered in the read section of this series, so we won't go into the details here. To keep the examples clean, I will reset the data from time to time. I'm going to use a file called resetdata.py. This file won't be covered in the tutorial, but you can find it on my blog. All right, let's do a simple insert. First, we'll get a cursor from our connection. Then we'll prepare an insert SQL statement using positional bind variables. And then we'll execute the prepared statement using the values of Sandy, 31, and I like horses. And then finally, we'll issue a commit. All right, when we run the code, we'll see first the original data from before the change, followed by the new data after the insert. Now, you'll notice in the new data, along with the data that we sent in, we now have an ID that was generated in the database automatically. Now, let's say that you have an array full of data and you want to create multiple records. You could loop through the array and fire off an insert statement for each row. And while this would work, it does tend to be inefficient and it makes multiple trips to the database. Instead, let's look at the execute many function. Now, I've gone ahead and reset my data so we have a fresh start. Here's the code we're going to run, and what we're doing is, first we create an array with a couple rows of data. You can add more if you'd like. Then we get a cursor from our connection. We let our cursor know how many rows and the data types to expect from our inputs. Here, if our data type is a string, we define the max size to expect, but if it's a non-string, such as 31, then we let it know what the data type is, such as an int. Then instead of execute, we use execute many, and we pass it the statement and our data array that we called rows, and finally we commit. And when we run the code, we see our original data followed by the new data that includes the two new rows. Something to be aware of when issuing data manipulation language or DML statements is how transactions work with multiple connections before and after they're committed. Basically, when you make a connection to the database, it creates a session, and any data changes are only visible to that session until you commit. Even if you create two sessions as the same user, these are separate sessions and they can't see each other's pre-commit changes. Let's take a look at an example. After resetting the data, we'll modify the helper function to accept a connection so that we can see what the data looks like from multiple sessions. We'll call the function to see the starting state of the data, and then we'll make a second connection as the same user. We create a cursor from the original session, prepare an insert statement just like we've done in the other examples, then we'll execute the statement with the binding values of Susie, 31, and I like rabbits. Now, to demonstrate what each session sees, we'll call the helper function twice, once for each connection. Then, after committing the data, we'll do it again. Looking at the output, we see that the original data from the first call matches the data seen by the new connection after the insert, but the data seen by the original connection that actually made the change can see the new row. After we do the commit, both the new and the old connection see the same data, including the new row. You may have noticed in the previous examples that the ID value is not passed in, but is automatically set sequentially. Now, prior to Oracle Database 12c, this was accomplished using a sequence and a trigger. In 12c, this can be accomplished using what's called an identity column, as in this example here. If you want more information on this, you can find it here. When you have data being manipulated on the database side, you'll often need the changed data for other functions, such as when you insert a row, you'll probably want to know what the newly generated primary key is. You could fire off a select right after the insert, but sometimes the only unique part of the row might be the newly generated value. A better solution is to use a returning statement. This requires a small change to the SQL statement and a different type of bind variable. Let's take a look at the example. We want to create a parent record, and after it's inserted into the database, we'll use the new primary key to create a child record. This is pretty much the same as the other examples, except for here, we create a cursor variable object and set its type to number. We add the returning clause to the SQL statement and bind the value. Then when we execute the statement, we use the cursor variable object we defined above. After we execute the statement, we call the getValue function of our new ID object to get the returned ID. Now we can use the new ID to create a child record the same way we've done in the other examples. And you can see in the output that the new value, the owner in Sandy's new pet, and Sandy's ID are all set to 3. So that's a quick overview on using Python and CX Oracle to create data in the database. All of the example code can be found on my blog at learncodeshare.net. If you find this useful, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.